Kenya a safe country? This is probably the first question you asked yourself when you were thinking about making a move or visiting the country. I also heard it all. When I was moving here first, people were asking me if there are no crimes here, if it's even a stable country, if there's even hospitals and insurance that I can use. So I heard all of these questions too. And in this video, I want to answer them to you that you can lift your doubts and you don't have to worry about these things anymore, because I can tell you how things are actually here on the ground. Let me be honest with you. Before I was moving here, I heard all these questions from all different people that never had any experience or touch points with Kenya or even the African continent. And so I was a bit biased by all those questions and all those concerns, even when I myself was not worried at all about it. And because I traveled a lot before I moved to Kenya, I knew that all these concerns about all these different countries are just in the minds of the people, and actually most of the time everything is safe. And this even when the government sends out a travel warning, what I think exists for every single country in the world. So I didn't listen too much to it, and now I made my experiences. And because I know that people will ask you these questions, or you will ask these questions yourself, let's dive right into the topic. My name is Marvin, and 2 years ago at 23, I decided to leave Germany and to move to Kenya. And since then, I've been quite happy with the decision. Life is good. And I went through a bunch of different challenges here that I want to share with you on this channel, that you have a much easier move and like a much easier starting point than I had 2 years ago. Let's start with the political stability. And this was especially one of the big factors, because before I came here, most of the people were really worried that everything here is very much unstable, that I had to be worried about the political situation, that it could crash all the time. And this, as I said before, is oftentimes from people that have never had any touch points with the African continent. And I mean, it's true, many African countries have these issues, and Kenya is not free from all of this. But I would say overall, it's quite stable. I think what most people talk about when they think of the Kenyan instability in terms of the politics is maybe the 2007 violence that happened here during the elections. So this is what many people were worried about me when I was moving here. Luckily, I was here in 2022, like close before the next elections were coming, and I witnessed a complete different picture. It was still not very much calm, but it was much calm. At least this is what the locals confirmed with me. And even when I met a couple of foreigners that had been living in Kenya for a long time, just to get their perspective of everything, then they told me that during these elections in 2022 that they didn't need to leave Nairobi or like the country, because it's much more peaceful than it used to be. So Kenya went a very long way, and it's not as unstable anymore as it might used to be. But now, with also setting some facts, because I know some of you might be worried when things like demonstrations, when things like, they're called mandamano here, when some things like this happen, it might be a bit unfamiliar if it's the very first time for you witnessing something like this. And for me, it was the same thing. But since I live here for the last 2 years, I witnessed quite a couple of protests, and Kenyans are very much active and have a loud voice in terms of this. But most of the time, they are quite peaceful. But I also witnessed a couple of months back one protest that was a bit heavier than the other ones before. In the end of the day, it didn't really had a big impact on my personal life. It was just that some of the roads were blocked. That's like there were protests going on for quite a while during this time. But in the end of the day, this was the only big incident that I witnessed like during my time here. And this can occur every now and then, but in the end of the day, if you're just moving in the right areas, it's good to know what's happening, why it's happening. But in the end of the day, it's not really an issue on your daily life. So the country is quite stable most of the time, besides some protests happening every now and then. But otherwise, I think it's quite stable in instance of the political stability. And this leads me to the next point, what is security in general. People were just warning me a lot about like how unsafe Nairobi would be, if it's not dangerous when I'm there alone or by myself. I started to believe them because I didn't have my own image. But after living here now for like quite a while, I recognized that everything here is very much safe. So I feel very safe and very comfortable here. And this whenever and wherever I'm moving around. But of course, there are always things happening like in any other big city, like in any other country in the world as well. So I wouldn't say that I feel unsafer than in Germany. I think for me, the feeling is the same in both places. For instance, or like, I would say I feel even safer than when I was living in the States, where I heard like many more incidents that were like deadly or like or like different kinds of incidents that I never witnessed here in my life. So I feel like from a safety perspective, like going out everywhere, like if you stay in the right areas, you will not have an issue at all here. Of course, I said there are maybe different locations where you shouldn't show off your belongings, where you shouldn't show off your phone, whatever, but this is just because people don't have another option sometimes. So I don't even take it bad if they do things like this. The Kenyans I met, and I met a lot of them and I talked to a lot of them, I know that most of them are very kind-hearted people. I recognize that they wouldn't harm you necessarily. They would just take maybe your phone or like take whatever you have on yourself just to get the next food and survive. But it's not like in the States, for instance, where you have to worry about getting shot all the time, or where much worse things are happening than here in Kenya. You still have some doubts in your head. Most of the places here, they are fenced. They have electrical fences. You have 24-hour security. If you're entering malls, you always have security. They have dogs sometimes there that are like just seeing if there's anything dangerous with the people that entering the places. So in terms of this, I think you have a lot of security layers here that help you to be and feel safer in the end of the day, if this is something you really are worried about. So for me as a man, from my perspective, I feel very much safe over here, that I even could and did it multiple times, like walked long distances here, even walked at night, because at some point I knew the area, so that I just know how to interact with people and know where to walk around and where not to walk around to. So I would say in general the concern of safety was lifted after spending a couple of weeks, days, maybe months here. So at this point I feel very much safe. And you also don't have the necessity to walk around here if you still feel unsafe after the first couple of weeks of visiting, or like the first couple of days of visiting here. You can also just use like Uber, Bolt, Bodas, whatever, so that you're just always getting from point A to point B if you still have any kind of feeling that you don't feel very much safe here in Nairobi, or like in another place here in Kenya. The next point I want to touch on is the healthcare system. Before I came here, my family and many people were like very much worried about the healthcare system here in Kenya. They were like worried if I even can get an insurance, and even if they have good doctors or doctors at all. They just had no clue about how developed Kenya actually is. And what I realized over the time, I luckily I never went to any hospital. I never went to a doctor, so I'm quite healthy. So I never had to take a look in these locations. But at least from the things I see, I have a very good healthcare insurance. So you have like all these different kinds of offers from healthcare insurances to go to every single hospital here in Kenya. You have public hospitals, but you also have private hospitals like in any other country. Let's say similar to Germany as well, where you have the same things happening. And I would say when I was doing my research recently, I saw that Kenya even ranks the second best in terms of the hospitals they have here. I had a lot of cases where people from Uganda and people from Ethiopia and many different other African countries are brought here to Kenya to get their surgery because they are very far advanced in terms of healthcare and like health. And if I'm being very honest with you, even compared to the German healthcare system, said I have never seen a hospital here in Kenya. But people that are worried about me from Germany, I would say the system there is also breaking down very quickly. When I was there the last time, I heard a couple of stories where they didn't have enough doctors and enough nurses and stuff to maintain their own patients that are laying in the facilities of the hospital. So I wouldn't say that the system at the moment at least necessarily is better. Maybe they have better doctors, maybe they're a bit more advanced, but it's also a system that is breaking very slowly, that I don't know if I would feel better even if I get my stuff done here in Kenya. With some things, maybe a lot of things can be also much more better and safer over in Germany, of course. But this is just to say that like, even if I'm coming from a country that's more developed, it also has its flaws. It also has its problems, and it's not perfect at all. Even if the doctors are maybe better educated and have more experience and stuff. But in the end of the day, it's also not a perfect system, and like they also have a lot of struggles over there. So if I can give you now 5 different tips that will help you to just feel safer and be safer here, especially if you're not familiar with like Kenya or like Nairobi, depending where you stay. You're worried about protests and mandamano, so the protests happening here. You can just keep yourself updated with like some Kenyan local newspapers, but there's also a lot of like online sources from Kenyan media companies that will tell you what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening. that you just understand when to come and like where to move in what areas, and maybe sometimes if something happens and you have planned a trip, that you know what to avoid here. The second thing I would tell you maybe is not to walk around at night if you're really not familiar with any locations. And even if you're familiar with locations, the locals still tell me not to walk around at night. But I feel quite safe because I know my way and know where to move around. But of course, always something can happen. So I understand the concern they have. So just try to avoid until you really are aware of what areas to go to and not to go to. And even then, it's not even necessary. Instead of this, just call an Uber, just get a boda or something like this, just to not put yourself into any unnecessary risk. The next practical tip I would give you is just like, if you come in here to visit or to move, just figure out what locations you feel safer in or that are actually safer. Like, let's say if you want to move within Nairobi, you can move into Lavington, Kilimani, Kileleshwa, maybe Spring Valley, Westlands, Gigiri, that's close to the Runda area as well. You can also live in Karen. So I would say these areas are the most safest ones, at least. So especially if you're new and you're not used to it, they also have quite a lot of like foreigners living in there in these areas. So this makes you maybe also feel a little bit safer for the first couple of months at least, or like the first year, however long you're going to stay here, even if you're just visiting, that you just have a safety base and safety net for you, that you can figure out all your plans from your safe location and figure out how the city works from there. And the fourth and the last one is basically just build some good relationships with some of the locals. Even if you're just here for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a week, or even if you're moving here, you should just make some local friends, and they will tell you, they will keep you posted what to do or not to do. Also, during the last big demonstrations, I have a big network also of like a lot of Kenyans here, and I was just asking them where I shouldn't move on this day when the big demonstrations were happening, and they told me what areas to avoid and where everything goes on as normal. So this will also help you a lot if you have some local connections, some local friends, that they can just advise you on things that are happening here on the ground. So now, if we're coming back to the question if Kenya is really safe, from my own perspective, I would say it definitely is. Maybe there were times when it was less safe, and maybe this is where all the stereotypes are coming from, that it's not a safe country to live in, or like that Nairobi is very unsafe. But from my own perspective, from living here for 2 years, I feel very, very much safe over here, and therefore I don't see any risk if you want to travel and visit. Of course, things can happen all the time, but I don't want to say that there's no risk at all involved. But as I said, once again, if you go to any city in the States, you have the same or even more risk than here in Kenya. I'm just telling you from my own perspective how I see things, how I experience things. And from my perspective, I would say Kenya is a quite safe country where you can just move around to. And I took multiple road trips through the whole country on all different sites, and I always encountered very nice and friendly and very helpful people along my journeys. So I can say from my own point of view that I really feel very much safe here in Kenya. And I hope this video helped you a little bit to not be too biased from all these opinions you hear from around you, to at least visit the country or to make the move you're wanting to move to Kenya, and at least spend a couple of weeks or days here to just get your own picture. Because what I don't like is if we have like these images in our head that we have never seen ourselves, and that those things are holding us back to not just make the thing we wanting to make. Because if it always is like this, we will never do anything. So I would say just make your own picture, create your own picture, come to Kenya and like check it out for yourself. So then at the next time you can have the same talk that I did to you now, to the next person you meet that want to spend some time in Kenya. So now let me know down below in the comments what other questions you have about life here in Kenya, and watch some of the other videos I placed right here, that you can get more insights on Africa's development, my journey of moving to Kenya and doing business here on the African continent. Thank you so much for watching.